Hey everyone, it's really cold over here, but I think it's about time for another update on this little Unimog 421. Now you probably already know what we're doing. It's still rust work on the cap, so let's just get right back into that. So I have been doing a bunch of stuff to this since you last saw it, but a lot of it is not visually obvious because it's just been a whole lot of really small things all around that I've been fixing up. Like tiny rust holes up here in the window frame and up in here as well. And like this whole front section, this back part of it, and that was sort of bent over for a lot of it. So I've been straightening all of that back up. There's a lot of parts I've just been cleaning off and checking for little rust holes, and if I did find some, I've been fixing those up. I've been straightening dents on the sides, and I've been removing broken bolts and all these little things. Now there's still a lot of these small jobs left. There's still some small rust holes here and still some in the window frame, but I'm not filming a whole lot of all these small jobs because it really is very repetitive and it's not terribly exciting. It's just a whole lot more of what I've been showing you in the previous videos. But the main difference is, of course, that I've been putting some paint on it. Now, that's not me trying to give it a cool camouflage paint job, I promise. This is some rust protective primer that I've been putting on to all of the places where I had bare metal. And it does actually serve several purposes, so I guess we could just go over that because some of you might just be wondering. So the main reason is, of course, to protect all of the parts that I have already done, so I don't leave a whole bunch of bare metal. Because our climate is very humid and it is the winter time, and I also don't have any heat in here, so there is going to be a lot of moisture in the air. So if I just leave all that bare metal, it's going to start rusting out again before I actually get the rest of it done. That's also why I gave the bed some of that red primer back then, because I knew this was going to be stored for a while, so I didn't want this thing to be all rusty by the time we have to actually paint it. But another reason for it, well, actually it's more of the same, it's for a lot of these places where I've been joining plates together. They are just overlapping and then I've spot welded them. I don't want to be fully welding this thin stuff because it's putting a whole lot of heat into it, and that's just going to make it warp and do weird things, and it's going to end up looking terrible. So I'm only spot welding just like the original parts were, but that does mean that I'm leaving little gaps here and there. Later on, I am going to be sanding it down and putting a bit of filler over it just to smooth it out a bit and make it look nice. But I do want a little bit of paint into these gaps. If I just put filler over there, I'm not going to get it all the way in, so it would leave some bare metal down there and that would start rusting pretty quick. So as I spray the primer on now, I spray it on nice and thick all of these places just to make sure it runs down in there. So even when I go to sand this down later, that paint is going to remain and keep a little bit of protection in all of these joints I have. And lastly, spraying this primer on as I go, it makes it much easier for me to visually keep track of what I'm doing, because I'm finding more and more things on this cab that need some attention or rust repairs, so this makes it really quick and easy for me to tell which parts I'm done with for now. I'm really happy I made this stand. This is so nice to work with. So the reason we're picking the video up again now is because now I'm getting into this back wall here, and a bunch of you wanted to see me do that. Now I've also been fixing up a lot of stuff over on this side. I've been doing all of these corners in here and this inner door frame, and I was working on the outer door frame and started to cut out this piece, but then I realized it went underneath this corner, so that was also bad, so it had to go anyway. So I cut out the bottom section of that, and I can see that this door frame carries on and attaches to this angled piece in here. Turns out that angle is holding a lot of things. It's holding this part. That was the floor that went over here. It went up and over. That's gonna have to go. Sort of behind that, but also underneath that, is this piece that comes down, and it was supposed to bend, but it's mostly gone. But it goes sort of both underneath and behind this piece, also attaching to that angle in there. this corner that I cut out, that would also come down and attach to that angle, and so would this part right here. And that is actually the rear wall, so that's not even held in place anymore, but it would also have been hooking onto that angle down there. But really, this is an overly complicated way that they've done this. There's just way too many different pieces attaching to that angle, because it also carries on over here and holds this, what do we call that? The hole for the transmission cover. And it also holds the hook down there to lift the cab, and it carries on over to the other side, hooking all that stuff onto it. So that angled piece in there is very structural, but there's way too many different things coming onto that. I'm not even going to try to recreate all of that the way that it was. It's going to take way too much time to disassemble all of this and try to recreate the pieces, and also just keeping track of what goes where. So I'm going to just go ahead and cut out the whole thing. Just cut out all of this stuff. And I'm going to put a new, fresh piece of angled steel in there, some nice thick stuff to make it good and strong. And I'm just going to bring all of these parts back down and attach to that new angled piece. But now the problem becomes that this whole lower corner, that's really part of what keeps this whole cab together, along with the roof, but we already know that that's really bad. It's barely holding on to the corners. It just has a few spots that are still attached. So that's almost coming apart already. So if I just start cutting out this lower half of it, I risk this whole cab starting to collapse, or at least move a little bit. And I really don't want that. I need this whole pillar here to be back in exactly the same spot. Otherwise, my doors are probably not going to fit when I'm done. So before I just start cutting out big sections of that lower corner, I want to brace this a bit. So I'm going to cut out some pieces of steel and weld them in between the back wall and the floor, and also in between the pillars and stuff, just to hold everything in place while we fix up that rear wall, and probably also while we cut out and fix up the roof. And once all of that is done, we can cut the braces back off and make it all look nice and pretty. So, enough talking, let's get to it. So I was just making sure that the doors would fit, and I immediately ran into a different problem. So I knew all along that the passenger door over here was a bit difficult to shut, but it turns out that's more of a problem with the door than it is with the cab, because this window frame is very bent. It is supposed to be bent inwards a little bit, but not this much. You can see when we close it, it sits almost correctly up there, something like that. But down here, we're still a good finger's width out. So there's way too much bend in this window frame. So not only do we have to fix the rust in the bottom of this door, we're also going to have to do something about that. But that's going to be a project for another day. For now, I just want to check this gap right here. We do have to come in a little bit, but we can sort that out right away. There we go. Now this might look a little bit overkill, and it probably is, but you know, better safe than sorry. Besides, part of this is really just holding up the A-pillars out here, and that's just because I knew I was gonna have to be bracing these anyway when we go to fix the roof. So I figured I may as well do it now, and that way these two door pillars can sort of support each other while all of this stuff is going on. Of course, having all of this extra steel in here, that does make it a bit more difficult to get in there and do a bunch of cutting. But as I was saying previously, I'm not going to delicately cut out all of these individual pieces. I'm just going to be removing all of it and build it back up. So let's get to cutting. I just wanted to take a moment to show you something, because right here is one of those little design flaws that are in these old round cabs. There's a couple of places where something like this is going on, but right here is a pretty clear example now that I've cut it open. So out here we have this whole angled piece. That's the thing that I'm trying to replace. And here on the other side we have this whole pillar that is part of the rear wall. Now I've cut out the corner there, but normally this whole thing is completely welded down at the bottom to that angle there. And that means that between this angled piece and that pillar in there, you end up with this little enclosed pit down here at the bottom. And you are gonna get moisture and condensation in there over time, and that water has nowhere to go, so it's just gonna pool up inside that little cavity, and that is just a whole rust disaster waiting to happen. Look at how much stuff is in here. So whenever I come across something like this, I try to change it a little bit to avoid that, either by putting holes in the bottom or redesigning it a little bit so it's not completely closed off. Because as I said, you are going to get moisture in there no matter what, so you may as well leave a way for it to escape. And besides, having holes in something like that, that's going to allow you to spray some rust protective stuff in there as well. And as I mentioned, these little rust traps, they can be found in several places on these old round cabs. Usually in the bottoms of the different pillars, and also up there in that roof gutter, but we'll get back to that. But honestly, I'm not gonna hold it against them. This whole cab design, it's over 60 years old at this point, so they usually do things a little bit different today. So, as I had just cut out this whole corner here, I figured I may as well rebuild this part right away. At least enough that I could get this inner corner here reattached. Because I could, and also it gave me one more fix point. Because even with all my bracing in here, this whole rear wall could still move a tiny little bit. So the more places that I can lock this down, the better. And with that other corner over there still being somewhat attached, that does mean that now I should be able to pretty safely cut out this whole middle section here. Alright, so finally I have everything secured back in place. I finished up the inner part of these door pillars here, and also I have those supports for the back wall tacked in place. So now I can safely go ahead and remove some of all this bracing I put in here, because at this point it's really just getting in the way of me finishing up my welds down here. And it's also going to be in the way for when I have to do the outer skin of that rear wall. Now I'm going to be leaving some of the stuff here in the door openings. I might remove that one, but all this other stuff is going to stay, and so are the large ones holding the upper part of that rear wall, because all that stuff is also going to help to keep everything in place for when we have to go and do the roof. But I can get rid of all this down here that was just holding the bottom end of that rear wall. So that is all of the structural parts of this rear wall done. So all that's really left to do down here is to get all this outer skin fixed up and reattached. Now it's actually not welded to this frame in here in very many places. It's welded around the window back there and out here where it comes around to meet the door frame or door pillar. And it's also welded up here where the different sections meet. But for all the parts on the inside here where it's touching the supports, it's actually just held in place with some epoxy sealer glue stuff. Now it's long gone on this one, but I am going to be reattaching it the same way, just using some of that epoxy sealer. Now of course the right way to do that would be to take off these 3 sections completely, then get them fixed up and clean off all the surfaces, put down some new epoxy sealer and put everything back in place and tack weld it back on. But I am not going to be doing that because that will be a massive job. Instead, I am just going to be prying this out. I can get quite a bit of room to work with, so I'm going to clean it off in there best that I can. And then I'm going to make the pieces that are missing and get those welded back on. I can do it in stages because I have to do the corners first, and then this middle section is kind of overlapping these, so I can do that last. So I get those pieces welded back on. Everything gets a couple of coats of that primer as well, just to protect it a bit. And then with a very thin nozzle, I'm gonna shove it in between here and apply some new epoxy sealer all the way around. It should be doable. It'll at least be good enough. There might still be a few places where it's kind of loosening up, but honestly, that doesn't really matter. It's gonna be plenty good for what it's for. Alright people, I'm gonna end this video here because this stuff needs some time to dry anyway before I can finish up the last few welds. And besides, I'm filming this on the day of New Year's Eve, and I kind of wanted to get the video out just before then because I didn't really want to do one of those videos looking back at the year and what we've done and such. I figured you guys would be much more interested in the progress on this. And also, I wanted to take this opportunity just to say how much I appreciate all of you guys watching along. It makes doing projects like this a lot more fun. And also, it's pushing me to do much more than I initially would have done. So, all your positive comments and all your positive support, it really means a lot, and I appreciate it. So I just wanted to wish you all a very happy new year, and I wish the best for you in the next one. Thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you on the other side. Well, the other side of New Year's, that is. Not like when we're dead or...